to talk about a very underrated film franchise. As we all may know, there are those with exceptional storylines and loving characters that fully immerse us in their world of adventures, but are not too often brought up in conversations. And then there are those that, despite having success in the box office, leave us questioning, what on earth made them believe this was a good idea? But don't get me wrong, I enjoy both of these franchises, to an extent. But today, I'll be focusing on the first installment of the prequel trilogy for Planet of the Apes, Rise of the Planet of the Apes. I chose this 2011 sci-fi flick directed by Rupert Wyatt as my research topic. This won't be just another film review or film analysis, oh no. I'm determined to dissect the psychology of the film and demonstrate just how complex Caesar's character really is. What first interested me in using the film as a primary source was the fact that it was entirely out of the perspective of the human and in the perspective of an ape. We were able to see Caesar struggle with his identity, suffer from mistreatment, and overcome all of it through his eyes. Here are some of the research questions I attempt to answer. How does Caesar's human-like intelligence impact the way he perceives himself? What cinematic techniques and effects are used to humanize Caesar, thus making his identity obscure? And finally, how do the motifs and the psychology of oppression emphasize a shift in Caesar's status? My main argument is that Caesar's character eliminates such ideologies that separate humans from animals by sharing the ability to internalize oppression and come out the other end with a greater degree of autonomy. Now, I'm not that smart on my own. So, like any other research project, I apply multiple secondary sources to help me make my point. So first I had to establish what is the similarity that Caesar, a chimpanzee, shares with human beings. Caesar's level of intelligence makes him capable of human-like cognition and expression of emotion. Even though that's technically achieved through motion capture technology, but we'll take a look at that later. The point is that I knew my film analysis would have a psychological approach to it, so it seems reasonable to provide a little insight into how this was possible. The film starts with chimpanzees being hunted out and captured in the forest by extremely rude human beings who then take them to scientific research labs so that they can be tested on. Now this man right here is Will Rodman, played by James Franco, who happens to work at Genesis Laboratories as a geneticist, and he has a father, Charles Rodman, played by John Lithgow, but his father, he has Alzheimer's. Now you can imagine how devastating that is to Will, so what does Will decide to work on?
A cure to Alzheimer's.
But at the expense of what? The apes are in trials for ALZ-112, which is supposed to be
a gene therapy,
but actually ends up giving apes advanced intelligence. Caesar was exposed to the drug while he was in the womb, therefore causing his brain to rapidly develop, and that's why he's so smart! Okay, and now that we got that out of the way, it's time to focus on Caesar's confusion on what he really is. My first observation was Caesar's living conditions under Will's care. He had his own room, lived peacefully among Will and his father in the house, and even wore clothes. Caesar was domesticated into a companion species. But Caesar was never seen as an equal, was he? Yes, he had freedom around the house, but couldn't step outside of it. Yes, he could have fun in the forest if he'd like, but needed permission. And yes, he wore clothes like a human, but was kept on a leash. Caesar never even bothered to question his treatment, for he knew nothing outside of it, up until...
Caesar! Caesar! Come on.
Was Caesar a pet? We are seeing the very first time he doubts his identity. We are also seeing where he stands in relation to humans. There are two motifs throughout the film that help visualize Caesar's character development: the supplicating gesture and the window. The supplicating gesture is just Caesar's way of asking for permission, instinctively being submissive towards Will and putting his trust and faith in him. The window represents an opening and a barrier to the human world, something Caesar cannot seem to be a part of for being an animal. When Will's father got worse and Caesar had no choice but to leave the house on the instinct to protect a loved one, we see how ashamed and guilty he feels as everyone looks upon him in fear. He is sent to a primate shelter, where he experiences far more extreme oppressive conditions. He is caged up and violently handled by the other apes and the caretaker. As a form of comfort, Caesar draws his bedroom window on the wall with chalk. He wants to return home. This moment emphasizes the oppression Caesar internalized. He never had freedom to begin with, but when things suddenly become worse, he accepts the treatment that was given. He acknowledges that his difference to humans justifies his restrictions. He had it good with Will, and now he believes that he was fortunate enough to be treated the way he was at home. He regrets ever asking and wanting more because he understands that he didn't deserve it in the first place. At first, he is still wearing his clothes, but as he is basically bullied by another ape named Rocket, his shirt is torn off his body, stripping him from his once domesticated life. And then comes the moment where we see a change in Caesar. Will visits Caesar, and as expected, Caesar is happy to see him and hopes to return back home. He extends his arm as a variation of the supplicating gesture and trusts that Will get him out. Unfortunately, Will is unable to without a court order and leaves Caesar frustrated. Caesar snaps. He quickly erases the window with his shirt and realizes that he does deserve better. All apes do. He is just as capable, just as smart. And so, he begins to plot, thus initiating the first steps of the ape revolution. But, I mean, is there still hope that Will take him home? Oh yeah, here he comes. The gate's open, it's time to go home and have a happy ending. Oh, wait, what is that leash? What is it doing there? This time, Will extends his arm in the supplicating gesture. Oh, Caesar reaches out and closes the gate on him. Wow, that was intense. That is the exact moment where the shift from internalized oppression comes to a greater degree of autonomy. Caesar's status in relation to humans has also changed. He will no longer accept his place on the hierarchy that was specifically made to deem humans as the superior species. He wants to be equal, and he will fight to be equal. And we see him as an equal in the last supplicating gesture where Caesar helps Will stand up to his level. Now that I've talked enough about the things I paid attention to in order to seek the similarities between Caesar and humans, we have to remember that it is the filmmakers whose decisions blur the boundaries and help us as the audience understand Caesar. Motion capture technology and Andy Serkis's performance as Caesar take the accuracy away from an actual chimpanzee and humanizes the animal by giving us facial expressions to sympathize with. That is why I chose this movie as my research topic. I saw that by combining human and animal attributes and comparing both species, oppression can be interpreted as an interspecies issue, basically something that affects not just humans. We are actively trying to resist oppression, which leads us to root for Caesar instead of our own species. The film made us forget about our division and challenged the social hierarchy responsible for the exploitation of groups of people and other species. And to speciesism, we should say, no! Because if apes are anything like humans, they will rebel. And this movie made it very clear that
apes together, strong!